Tom Coloney, how you doing? Who is Tom Connolly? Tell me about yourself.
Yeah, Chris. Well, first and foremost, appreciate you having me on. Really excited to do this with you. My fitness journey, I guess we'll start there, right? I started back, really, I blew my knee. I was a former athlete, so I played basketball in college, low level junior college, blew my knee out, the typical, hey, had the injury, had to figure out from there, like how to get yourself back in shape to get yourself back to play. And then in reality, what happened from there, I just kind of fell in love with the fitness space. I had some pretty cool mentors as far as, guiding me through fitness, nutrition. And then as life kind of continued on, I found myself working for the Army, after I finished my undergrad in health and fitness promotion. I worked with the Army for about 4.5 years through an organization called the Army Wellness Center. So I did a lot of things like metabolic testing, VO2 max testing. So a lot of exercise sciencey stuff. It was pretty cool. Got some really good information, got some really good experience in that space. And then as time went on, another organization opened up. It's called Holistic Health and Fitness, started working with the Army in that respect, doing similar things, right? And then now I currently, again, continue to work for the Army, but I work with the military police. So specifically 42nd MP out of Joint Base Lewis McChord. And I'm also a coach for Team Biolayne, and that's actually relatively recent within the last, 6 months or so. So it's been quite a journey as far as fitness goes, but as far as me personally, I really just enjoy, obviously, health and fitness, or else I wouldn't be, in this space for as long as I have been. But I'm a big sports guy. So I coached high school basketball actually for about 5 years. Sounds like I had a lot going on, but I did. Coached high school basketball for about 5 years in my old hometown in a little upstate New York. And I'm very adamant about that. Huge LA Dodgers fan, World Series champs this year. So, but that's basically it for me. Really, focus on health and fitness, really like sports. And of course I like food, or else I wouldn't be in this, nutrition space.
Yeah, of course, and that actually brings up. So first and foremost, that's your expertise, your area of expertise, and who you're working with the military police, particularly. And we're talking to primarily police officers, tactical athletes now. And so you mentioned nutrition and enjoying to eat. I think we all do. That's one of the challenges for police officers, particularly those who do shift work. So a couple of things that I want to touch on today in our conversation are some quick and accessible food options for officers or busy professionals that support energy and performance, some time-efficient meal prep strategies for busy schedules, and the all-important protein, the micronutrient protein for muscle repair, performance, and satiation. So tell me, Tom, what are some down and dirty, quick tips for accessible food options for let's just say shift working police officers?
Yeah. So the first and foremost, like I like to touch on this. I have most certainly not like coined this term, but I like to call it my power P's. First, we need to prioritize, right? If this stuff isn't a priority to you, it's like talking to a wall to a certain extent, right? And that's the unfortunate reality. Like as far as like health and fitness and just getting like healthy, solid, whether it be protein options, whether it be just food in general, like it has to be a priority, or else we're always just going to continue to revert back to the old ways, right? And we can definitely expand upon that a little bit as we move through this conversation. But the priorities and then preparation, right? So those two P's right there are really, really powerful and really, really important, because those are more so behavioral changes rather than just, nutrition, little tips and tricks, right? Those are like things that you have to learn over time, or if you've integrated and have continued to build over time, right? So without those two things, that's like my first few sessions with folks is like, let's sit down and like really organize this and try to get this down. But some down and dirty tricks and tips, is something as simple as like gas station, for example, right? We all go to the gas station and oftentimes like, all they have there is some pizza, they have some chips, maybe some nachos, it's really quick. Not that can't be a part of a healthy diet, but if that's primarily where our food choices are coming from, they're just very high in fat, right? So it's going to jack our calories up and it just leads to over-consuming relatively rapidly. But we want to look for things that are generally speaking higher in protein, higher in fiber, right? So if we go into a gas station, a really easy one to go to obviously is like a pre-made protein shake, a protein bar, beef jerky, right? That's a really good one as far as generally speaking, a little bit lower in calories, higher in protein content. But there's obviously a plethora of things. Hard-boiled eggs, right? Those are some things you can find, like the prepackaged hard-boiled eggs. If we're going to grab like a sandwich or something like that, typically speaking, maybe not have the condiments on that. Get one of those pre-made sandwiches, something like turkey or oven roasted chicken. Those are really good options. And then fiber. That's the one a lot of people are like, well, what has fiber in it, right? And it's the stuff a lot of times that we push from a nutritional perspective, not only because like it's good for us, but it's because it's going to help us stay full and satiated for longer periods of time. So fruits, vegetables, and then of course whole grains. So some really simple ones: fruit cups, veggie cups, right? And then when we're talking about like whole grains, whole grain crackers, light popcorn is a really good one. All right. So if you've ever looked at like just a small snack size bag of light popcorn, it's got a lot of fiber for a little amount of calories. And those are the kind of things that we want to get. But those are the two things: high protein, high fiber. If we can stick to those things, they're going to make us feel full and satisfied, but they're also going to get us a whole bunch of nutrients on top of that, right? That are going to help optimize our health and performance.
Absolutely. That's one of the recommendations I always make, is to keep the protein consistent. And of course, fiber is often the forgotten redheaded stepchild that people don't consider. It's very important. And as we get, as it should be for everybody in every stage of life, but as we get older, the health benefits that go along with fiber are long. So you mentioned behavior change, and of course we can start with the tips and the tricks and say, okay, well, here are some healthy food options for you, but it really comes down to a behavior change. And that's what I'm trying to do as part of the wellness program at the Annapolis Police Department is kind of get a culture of wellness and particularly nutrition, using typically periodization and addressing and looking at how officers can periodize their training and their nutrition based on the phases of either their personal training, the personal exercise programs they're on, how they're eating to their preference, whether it happen to be keto, because everybody thinks carbs are the devil for some reason. Intermittent fasting, much the same, or just a whole balanced diet, as we always recommend. And of course, here we're in a humid subtropical climate here in the Mid-Atlantic in the state of Maryland. We have cold winters, we have hot and humid summers, and so thus our call volume and the types of crimes we typically see, they do kind of change with the seasons. Sure. And as does the activity level, as does the excuses of there's no healthy food options. Okay, well, you just sat your butt in the car for 8 hours or 10 hours or 12 hours because it's cold outside, and you only stop by the Quick Mart and you pass right by the hard-boiled egg, you pass right by the light popcorn, you pass right by the whole wheat crackers, and you went right for the pizza or the hot dog. Hey, look, I had the conversation with Dr. James Hoffman of Renaissance Periodization, and I agree with his statement. He says, police in the police profession, we don't have a fitness problem, we have a fatness problem. And what we have to do is we have to address body composition first, and that then in turn comes with proper nutrition. He called bullshit on the on the excuse, hey, I don't have time to meal prep. Hey, I don't, there's no healthy options out there at the Quick Mart or the gas station. He called BS on that. I call BS on it. And I think you do too, because you just named at least 7 or 8 things that you can do to pop in. Now, am I pointing my finger at police officers? Yeah, I am, because I'm a police officer. I have been for 22 years. Enough. So I know. I know. So when it comes to meal prep, then, what are some strategies that the busy police officer or the busy professional can implement to aid in their meal prep?
So I think it goes back to that first point I kind of touched on, right? Like still kind of that priorities and like that preparation. Like if you prioritize something, because not only just in like whether it be the police force, whether it be just a busy professional, it's all kind of similar in a sense, right? As far as like we need to make sure that we have stuff prepared. And ultimately a lot of times, like, well, I don't have a lot of time, and you really don't need to take a lot of time. There's things like crock pots, right? Slow cookers. There is air fryers. There is rice cookers. I mean, those are all set and forget kind of, items that everyone should, if they can, have them available to them, right? So that's going to be like just figuring out really simple, certain ways to kind of utilize tools to make it more time efficient. Like those are the tools that I would recommend and encourage. But on top of that, I generally like to encourage bulk or batch cooking, right? So I'm not necessarily like a huge fan of like, you can, if you want to, you know, cook up like 25 different meals and have them in your container set perfectly. Like, sure, that's going to be really efficient, but that's going to be probably less time efficient in the preparation side, right? So if you want to give yourself maybe like an hour on like a Sunday or something like that, or like the day before you start like a long, you know, stretch of shift work or something like that, I would say first and foremost, pick 1 or 2 protein options, right? So whether it be, you know, ground beef and chicken, whether it be eggs and turkey, whatever the case might be, in bulk cook those items. So rather than getting like a family pack of chicken, right, and just cooking 1 or 2 and be like, okay, this is going to be for my lunch and my dinner today, cook the whole thing. Right? Just cook the whole thing, whether it be throw it in the oven, whether it be pan-sear it, whether it be, again, use some of those other tools I talked about, but just cook it. That way you have it available. And then it's really just grab and go from that point on. Right? So you have a bulk amount of it in your fridge. When it's time for, you know, to get ready for the next day, it's like, okay, I just got to plop some protein in there. And then the next one is pick a couple carbohydrate sources. All right. So whether it be rice, whether it be some wraps, whether it be bread, it really doesn't matter, right? They all kind of fit into, if you want to look at just a general healthy diet, they can all fit in. Pick a couple of those things and also prepare those things in bulk as well. That way, now you have 2, if you look at like the My Plate model, right? That's just a really standard, like, but in all honesty, people don't give that enough credit. Right? Is if we start to shift our eating habits to look more so like that, a lot of people will all of a sudden see weight loss or better body composition simply by just kind of shifting up, right? So you got your protein source, you got your grain source, and now if you have some steamer bags, I'm a huge advocate of you know, convenience when it comes to that. So some steamer bags full of vegetables, whether it be, and then some like frozen fruit or just some fresh fruit, right? Boom, there you go. You have a well-balanced, well-rounded meal. And it literally, now that you have that stuff bulk cooked, it took you maybe an hour on a Sunday, right? And then it might take you 10, 15 minutes to throw it, if that, right? To throw that all in a Tupperware container. And now you have your lunch for the next day.
Yep, absolutely. And to take it one step further, is to actually have the meal prep containers laid out. You've done your bulk protein, you've got your carbohydrate source. Typically, particularly if you're having a meat or a protein source, there's going to be a little bit of fat in there. And of course, everybody likes to throw in a little dressing here and there, or some oil, some olive oil or something. It's fine. You get your healthy fat in there. But I think addressing, like you said, prioritization and prioritizing protein, and you bulk cook that. And so I eat, now this is my personal preference. This is not for everybody, but this is what I do. Exactly what you said. On Sunday afternoon, I cook all of my protein source, which happens to be chicken breast, and I cook pounds upon pounds of it. And I don't even cook it. I boil it. And everybody gags when they say, what, you boil your chicken? What, don't you have any flavoring on it? No, I don't. Okay, so I boil that. I kind of rotate through my personally, and this is also a recommendation, which is right in line with what you just said. I'll put a casserole dish in with a few cups of rice, brown rice, white rice, whatever the case may be. I may cook up some potatoes, get some bread sources, some pasta in there. Everybody's like, "Oh my gosh, you're eating pasta, you're eating bread." You know, I see you probably get the same comments.
Yes. Yeah.
And it's hey, you know, we're looking at calories and the prioritization of our energy intake, and placing it on that lean meat source primarily, and then having your meal prep containers already laid out, and kind of cook all at the same time, and you're committing an hour or something. You do crock pot, you throw it in, you set it for the day, you air fry some stuff. You can do a good amount of food that way. Of course, pasta takes a few minutes to boil, and then you got steamer bags. You can take that, you can do some things simultaneously, throw them into your meal prep containers, and they're all laid out. Personally, I can attest it's every single meal, every single bite for the entire shift is in there for 5 work days in a row.
Yeah.
Throw in some of those little cups of yogurt, a couple beef jerky sticks, and you're good to go. You've met your protein requirement or gotten close to it. You got some good, you spread out your carbohydrate intake. Hopefully there's a bit of fiber in there when it comes to your fruits, your vegetables, your broccolis and stuff. That's a favorite of mine and a lot of people I talk to. But it can be, you say, oh, well, are you making some sacrifices on flavor? Yeah, sure. but it doesn't mean you can't have your snack now and again. It doesn't mean you can't have a higher calorie meal. You got to balance out your calorie intake versus your expenditure if you're concerned about body composition and overall health.
Yeah.
So, Tom, tell me the importance of that protein and the two P's, prioritization and behavior change in protein. Why are we putting such an emphasis on protein? What is so important about protein?
Yeah, there's a lot of, I mean, really, when you think about what our body's made up of, right, down to the DNA, protein, right? So we need a substantial amount of protein just to support overall health and, just function, right? Physiological function. But in regards to like body composition specifically, first and foremost, we want to, at bare minimum, we want to hold on to muscle mass if our goal is to try dropping body fat, right? Now, if you're someone that's relatively detrained or you're like really, really, on the obese side or something like that, you're going to see like simultaneously like fat loss and muscle gain. But really, for the most part, for someone that maybe is well trained, right, we want to at bare minimum just hold on to that muscle mass. So that's why we, generally speaking, when body composition, recomp, or just a fat loss phase is the goal, I want to have that protein intake a little bit higher than what you might actually think. Generally speaking, a good rule of thumb, about 1.6 to 2.2 grams per kilogram of body weight. If you know your lean body mass, you can just do 1 gram per pound of lean body mass. That's a really good one too. And then the biggest one is the satiety, right? So protein is very satiating. If you think about, sitting down and eating, 1 or 2 slices of pizza, you're probably not going to feel substantially full, satisfied, or anything like that. But then if you were to sit down and eat, 8 ounces of chicken, right, and kind of work your way through that, you're all of a sudden going to feel it a little bit, right? So it takes a little bit of while to get through, but it's also with that satiety, with the satiety hormones, actually has, an impact on that. So protein just has a lot of different benefits. And again, I think the biggest one being when we're trying to lose body fat is that satiety. And the last thing, the thermic effect of food, right? So if we look at our overall metabolism, right, the thermic effect of food can be 10, maybe 15% of our total calorie expenditure for a day. And protein has the most thermic effect when we eat that. So the digestion process, the eating process requires the most amount of calories compared to fats and in carbohydrates.
And the macronutrient being protein, that is far less likely to be stored as fat anyway. Should we start to be in a caloric surplus? So that given said, we mentioned some protein sources. You mentioned some protein sources when we started with the quick stop, the gas station, with some hard-boiled eggs, some yogurt, maybe a sandwich, some turkey or something, and then we talked about with meal prep, throwing some chicken, some beef, or something like that, some beef jerky. So what are for those who are not real familiar with what the protein sources can be, and you mentioned MyPlate, and there is a website, myplate.gov, and so there's a lot of these basic principles, and there's recipes and things like that for people. One thing that I have noticed, and I'm sure you've noticed too, is that people like to get fancy with their meal prep, and that really digs into their time, and it also digs into, hey, they may sacrifice some of the protein for some tastier carbohydrate or some higher fat stuff, or with some dressings or a lot of salt and seasonings like this. Makes it really tasty. It makes it really easy to eat. And it's really easy to eat. You're going to eat more of it. So that goes all the way back then to the prioritization of certain types of food into the diet and into each of the meals. So therefore the cycle of the intake of the energy and putting emphasis on the protein itself, being more satisfied and getting the thermic effect of the digestion of the protein and the performance and such as that. So we talked about bulk cooking for meals. We talked about the protein sources. Now, what kind of recommendations can you make as far as training goes? So if somebody is, let's say, detrained or a brand new person at resistance training, and you gave the recommendation of 1 gram per lean body weight, if they know that. So somebody who's starting resistance training and they're overweight, they're over fat, and they can expect to gain some muscle while losing some fat, given the caloric considerations.
Yep.
Which does the protein requirement then, as they get leaner and they lose body fat and body weight, does that change, or should that remain consistent with the calculation of 1 gram per pound of lean weight?
So generally speaking, it's going to stay relatively consistent for the most part. Like obviously, there's going to be some slight deviations based on, like you said, like maybe lean body mass, but it really won't change up drastically. That's like one thing. If like let's say we're doing a fat loss phase, right, and someone like reach that goal, right? The protein, that's like the one thing we're probably not going to make a huge change on. It'll be the carbohydrate and the calorie intake, right? And generally speaking, that calorie intake is going to come from the carbohydrates. If we're going, back to like a maintenance phase or reverse dieting up to a maintenance phase, we're going to slowly but surely add those carbohydrates back in. And for the most part, protein, yeah, is going to stay relatively the same, right? Yep.
Okay, and so then how would you then, let's talk the macronutrient carbohydrate then, when it comes to performance. So we have athletes. We have a person who is, let's just say, a sedentary office worker, or somebody, we make it relevant to the conversation, a police officer, and some who may have no interest in. And by the way, I've changed my my thought process a lot. Those who speak to me on any regular basis, those that I used to say, oh, well, fitness and dieting and things like that, it's not for everybody. It's not for everybody's bag. But I've changed that. You chose a profession that it has to be your thing.
Yes.
Physical fitness has to be your thing. You do have to pay attention to your diet. I mean, the public depends on you, your partner depends on you, your family depends on you. So this is something that a conversation that has to be had. So when it comes to carbohydrates, and I think for a long time we've been trying to shake this thing that carbohydrates are so bad and carbs are going to make you fat. And you can't have white potatoes, and you can't have white rice, and you can't have pasta. So I see you agreeing, because it's the same conversations that we have with people over and over. How can we convince the person who is skeptical in the education that we're giving them, and saying carbohydrates are essential for performance, even maintenance, repair of, or at least assisting in the muscle retention and other functions throughout the body, cognitively and otherwise. What can we say to them to say, hey, look, carbs aren't that bad?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, keep pounding it in their head to a certain extent. No, but like that's like, because I do a lot of like group stuff as well with the soldiers, and we're always, and it's usually like during PRT, right? So it's usually at like 6:30 in the morning. They're either just starting or they're getting done with PRT. So I will, that's the one thing I'll go around and ask them, did you eat anything before? Did you eat anything before? Did you have anything before? And most of them are like, no. But a few select ones will catch on and be like, okay, why does he keep asking me that? Why does he keep asking me that? Of course, like I'm going to continue to give them an explanation of why, until finally one of them does, right? And all of a sudden, boom, they're like, whoa, I can actually finish my workout this morning. Or I don't feel just lethargic and just like I'm dragging the whole time, right? And I think sometimes it just takes one or two of them to all of a sudden kind of change the culture, from what I've gathered and seen anyways. Is like you said, it's kind of just like continuing to say it over and over again, whether it be myself, whether it be the strength coaches I work with. It's typically like, hey, did you grab something to eat beforehand? Make sure you grab something to eat after, right? And we often express that we want it to be a carbohydrate source. Have a piece of fruit before. Like it can be anything. Have, a granola bar, just something to get a little bit of something in your system and see if there is a difference between PRT with and PRT without. Generally speaking, once those individuals start to implement those carbohydrates beforehand and they see what it feels like to actually have some good fuel, boom, all of a sudden they're hooked and they continue to do it.
Okay. So myth busting, fact versus fiction, post-workout eating window.
Yes.
So tell me about how the science the science is science, but tell us what our view of this eating window that's come about and over the years, and what's the most current research and literature saying on that?
Yeah, so that's you're right. That's one of those old ones where it's like you have to eat within a half hour after you exercise, or else you're not going to reap all the benefits of muscle protein synthesis, so muscle growth, right? Typically speaking, it's a protein and carbohydrate combination to make sure that we're getting adequate protein to help induce that muscle protein synthesis, and then obviously, of course, the carbohydrates help shuttle the nutrients to the muscle, and then replenish any glycogen or glucose that needs to be restored, right? Now what we've seen is our body is sensitive to food from up to anywhere between 24 to 48 hours post workout, right? Now to maximize, it's kind of like we call it the garage window, right? I would say 1 to 2 hours maybe beforehand, and then anywhere between like 2 to 4 hours after exercise is when you're going to maximize muscle protein synthesis. But in reality, as long as you're hitting your total daily protein on a consistent basis and you're getting adequate carbs for recovery and repair, like I said, 24, potentially a little bit more hours, our body ultimately takes those nutrients and utilizes it for muscle protein synthesis.
Yeah, something that for the person kind of starting out, it could be overwhelming just to make a statement like that, and it really comes down to splitting hairs to some extent. But if you're looking to optimize that and optimize your nutrition, your training, your recovery, replenishing glycogen, and so on and so forth. So one of the things, particularly with athletes, and we'll call police officers tactical athletes, and hydration. What are your recommendations on hydration? Where do you put them in the hierarchy here? Or is it just like protein, it's got to remain consistent throughout?
I would go with the latter, right? I would say stay consistent. Obviously, hotter temperature, like hotter times of the year, of course, prioritize it a little bit more. But if you're in like a squad car the majority of the day, yes, you might get a little bit sweaty again if it's like a hotter day or something like that. But a lot of times, as long as you're getting, like, there's so many recommendations for water, intake out there. I usually just go about half your body weight in ounces is a really good, just a really simple one. But for most folks, if you have water with you, you have a water bottle with you and you're sipping on it every so often, obviously if you already feel like you're really thirsty, it might be a little bit past that point. Just make sure, every, 45 minutes to an hour, have a water bottle with you, take a couple swigs of it throughout, like I said, every 45 minutes to an hour. I think that'd be a good rule of thumb. And then on top of that, of course, the best way to monitor everyone, and I'm sure is familiar, is just look at your urine, right? If it has got a pungent scent or if it's really dark or something like that, then of course, like, again, you should be really hydrating, like prior to that regardless, but that's a really good indicator that maybe there's something going on. But it doesn't have to be necessarily completely clear, right? That's when you're going to find yourself every like half hour running to the restroom. But I would say like that light lemonade, I guess, is a good way to put it. Color would probably be what you're ideally looking for.
So with that, it becomes the conversation of now. I preface this conversation when I talk to people as I'm not a registered dietitian. But when it comes to supplementation and say the vitamins and all these kind of goofy marketing techniques and strategies that companies make, what's your opinion or your stance on just a standard multivitamin that you can get over the counter at your grocery for a multi for men, a multi for women, a multi for senior? Is that something worth taking, even giving consideration you may be getting some good fiber in the fruits and the vegetables and the other sources? What's your thoughts? What are your thoughts on a multivitamin? We can talk about other supplements if you want, but let's start with a multivitamin.
Yeah, I mean, there's, again, supplements are supplements, and I think at the end of the day, the first thing I always like to kind of say is if you're eating a balanced, well-rounded diet, really not super necessary, but there are some benefits. I would say multivitamins are usually fine, right? They're one of those things. It's like an insurance policy, right? It's just to make sure you're kind of covering all bases, because there are certain things, maybe you're just not eating enough, B12 or whatever the case might be, right? Or getting enough, whatever the case might be through whole foods, right? I think a multivitamin is completely fine. But it doesn't have to be any of those like Mega Man sport packs from GNC where you run in there and spend, $50, or like, I think it's Thorne is the one that a lot of people really, really are like, hey, it's really bioavailable. If you look at like the daily value, like the percentage daily value of what you'd get compared to like a Walmart brand, right? It's going to be pretty similar. And really you're not going to be lacking anything. But I think multivitamins are completely fine. Again, if you're covering all bases from a food sense, probably don't need it, but I don't think it's going to hurt anything.
Yeah. So I kind of do a face palm when people start talking about all the stuff that they go in and they spend hundreds of dollars on these supplements. Particularly, okay, so especially the guys my age. Now I'm in my mid 40s. Yeah, I guess I can still technically say mid 40s. And, so all the rage is these testosterone boosters.
Yeah.
And again, the face palm comes. for me. And but I'm a polite guy. So
Yeah, sure.
so what are your thoughts on the standard, let's just say GNC variety, um, uh, testosterone boosters, precursor, pro hormones, whatever the newest marketing gimmick might be?
Yeah, and that's a slippery slope as far as some of the stuff that you can find out there, right? Because there is obviously things like pro hormones, SARMs, like some of those things that those are going to be potentially highly like dangerous, right? Like those are the toxicity of some of that stuff you're putting in your body, right? Those will probably have some anabolic effects, sure. But as far as like your over the counter, like, hey, it's your test booster, it might help with libido a little bit, but as far as like actually boosting your testosterone to be very marginal. Things like ashwagandha get really pushed, or Tungat Ali, they get really pushed now. As far as, ashwagandha, maybe a little bit more information on that, but I would say that's more for like stress reduction and things like that, has a little more info out there. But as far as like testosterone boosting properties, it's going to be very, very marginal, if not anything, because a lot of times the simple fact is the best test booster out there, right? If that's what we're looking for, is sleep, right? So if you go ahead and get sleep, yep, and you're able to reduce your stress, right? Stress is going to be a normal part of life, but if you're a highly stressed individual and you're only getting 4 to 5 hours of sleep at night, and you're eating at McDonald's every day, and you're not exercising ever, that's a recipe for your testosterone levels to be plummeted.
Absolutely. Oh, you hit the big one on me here, sleep. And let me throw another one in there, alcohol.
Yep.
So alcohol abuse is big amongst
Sure.
In the police profession, and I'm sure military as well.
Yeah.
But sleep, sleep can be at sometimes no fault of the individual. Just shift work, kids, family, busy lifestyle obligations, things that just really make it tough to commit to that 7 to 9 hours that the average adult person needs, particularly if they want to perform well. But at the same time, we're kind of like our own worst enemy, where we know what the recommendation might be. We know what professionals in this field might say. But hey, I want that OT because I want that fancy car, or I want that OT. Maybe I need the OT because I got child support. Okay, fine, so be it. But there's your big P right there that you mentioned at the very beginning of this talk, is prioritization. And my argument is, and my position is, that sleep has to be the number one priority. I believe that your diet and your quality training will fall in place after that. We see alcohol abuse as a big problem and a big inhibitor to quality sleep and quantity of sleep and all the stages of sleep that are so essential. So thank you for saying sleep, because now I could talk for hours on that. That's a whole that's a whole nother conversation. But I'm glad you brought that up. So as we're talking about hormones, and particularly males wanting to go out there and find that supplement that can make them bigger, faster, stronger. As I make my recommendation, both anecdotally and what I've read and seen working with people, is creatine monohydrate. Seems to be pretty solid and reliable. What are your thoughts on creatine?
Creatine monohydrate is easily the most researched supplement out there, right? Like you can find a plethora of research on creatine, specifically creatine monohydrate. And I think it's great, whether your goal is to put muscle mass on, whether it's to lose weight, whether it be to perform a little bit better. It has just a nice plethora of benefits. Now, let's be honest. It's not like when people think of performance enhancing, because technically speaking, that's what it would be considered, right? They think of something where all of a sudden now you're just this big jack guy that can just do everything and anything, and it's going to shed body fat off just like that. When in reality, yes, it's going to help, but a lot of times I like to say, as long as you got all the other ducks in a row, right? So if you are getting quality sleep, you are getting quality nutrition, your stress is reduced or managed, you're training well, right? If you're just taking creatine to take creatine, think it's going to be the magic pill. Unfortunately, that's not the case, but it will be that little cherry on top, right? But the biggest thing with creatine is if you're taking creatine, it should be creatine monohydrate specifically. There's a whole bunch of other kinds of creatine out there, like ethyl ester. Like there's just a whole bunch of other ones like saying this is the best version, when in reality, what research shows, right, is that creatine monohydrate saturates the muscle 100%. All the other versions might be up to that marker or less. So why chance it when you know there's one that is 100% working, right? And the big, obviously, concern with creatine monohydrate is the water retention. We want that water retention. We want to have a hydrated muscle. A hydrated muscle is a healthy muscle. So it's not like you're putting a whole bunch of water and retaining it in your stomach. And you're like, well, that's why. No, it's going to be in your intramuscularly, right? We're going to hold on to that, and it's going to help with the optimization of muscle function. So we want it to be, we want that water retention to a certain extent. But again, I think it's fantastic and easily the best supplement out there.
I concur, and yeah, a lot are concerned about hey, and you said water retention and bloating, and that's not the kind of, when I explain it, it's not the kind of water retention we're referring to. It's the intracellular hydration within the muscle cell, and not under the skin subcutaneously or in the belly where you're going to walk around with a pot belly, and so good stuff. And creatine monohydrate can be, for example, an optimum nutrition brand creatine monohydrate powder, 5-gram servings is relatively inexpensive.
Very inexpensive.
Yep. Good grief. You find all these other these other fancy ones, and some of the ones that you mentioned are marketed very well, and people spend a lot of money and get a lot of the additives that just are unnecessary. So supplementing then protein with a protein powder, quality, say whey protein powder or casein powder, or even a vegetarian protein supplement. Your thoughts on that for somebody to achieve and get to that recommended dose of protein daily?
Yeah. So another supplement that I think is completely fine and safe for the most part, of course, like we want to look for that third-party tested variation of it, right? Because that's the issue with a lot of stuff. It's like the Wild Wild West out there, right? There is no governing body as far as like the FDA or something like that's concerned. The only one, unless they're third-party tested, that is looking over the product to, say, hey, what's in here is actually in here, is the manufacturer, right? So they can just kind of not put whatever on there, but to a certain extent, kind of. So we want it to be third-party tested. That's going to be first and foremost. But yeah, whey protein is one of the most bioavailable, variations of protein out there. And I'll just use, let's say myself for an example. All right. I generally shoot for about 200 to 210 grams of protein per day. Now, eating that through whole foods sometimes can be a little bit laborious, right? That's a lot, especially if we're looking at majority of it coming through meat sources. So to take a scoop or two, you're getting 25 to 50 grams potentially of quality protein. I think it's absolutely something that, is completely fine, safe, and necessary to a certain extent for some folks.
Yeah, agreed. And I'm a bigger guy, and I kind of shoot for that somewhere in that range as well, 210 to 230. I weigh about 220 on average here lately, so I'm kind of right there in that ballpark. And yeah, that's a lot of boiled chicken breasts.
Yes.
So the use of like a pure protein bar is what I use, and then a few scoops of protein at various times throughout the day, I think is a good solid recommendation as well. And that too is, a whey protein powder is also relatively inexpensive. Yep. Compared to, now if you get a big 10-pound bag of it, that can run you over $100, but that's going to also last you a few months potentially if you dose it out properly. Okay, so that brings up two questions related to protein then.
Yeah.
We take a couple scoops, say 2 scoops of your standard whey protein, give you approximately 50 grams of protein at that serving.
Yep.
Let's say you put it in some skim milk or some low-fat milk, and then I don't know, some people like to throw in some peanut butter, which, by the way, is not a source of protein, shouldn't be considered a protein source, right?
Yep.
But they do it, and that's fine. That's fine. I don't hate on that. So people are like, oh no, but you shouldn't consume more than 30 or 40 grams of protein at a time. What's your message to them?
Yep. So it comes down to total daily protein is really what it boils down to. I will say this: sitting and eating 100 grams of protein in one meal might be difficult. But ultimately, it's not like we're going to just be, it's going to waste or it's going to be stored as body fat or something like a lot of the misconceptions out there used to be. It's not all going to go to straight up muscle protein synthesis per se, but remember, protein has a lot of different, physiological processes that it takes a part in when we're talking about our body. So yes, some of it might go to muscle protein synthesis, but some of it might go to, cellular regeneration or whatever the case might be, right? So there's a whole bunch of different things it could be going to. So it just comes down to that total daily protein. Again, if I were to try taking 200 grams of protein in one sitting, going to be difficult. That's why it's generally a good recommendation to spread the love out a little bit. I like to spread it out evenly throughout each meal that I eat. So I usually eat about 4 to 5 meals a day. That's going to be the easiest. But if you're only eating 1 or 2 meals a day, again, it can be done. It's just going to be a little bit harder on you.
Okay. And that's always a fun conversation to have with people because, it's kind of hard to comprehend because we've been told for so long by so many different so-called and maybe real talk, maybe that was the true prevailing science or understanding at one point, but that's not so as we know it today. So also then coming to total protein consumption, there's diets that are heavy on protein. And even to say guys like you and me who are eating north of 200 grams of protein a day, some may say, hey, well, that's hard on the kidneys.
Yep.
What are we looking at as far as that goes?
So unless you have some sort of underlying kidney issue previously, generally speaking, what the research has shown is you will be fine on a higher diet. Like, yes, of course, it's going to be a little bit more stress on the kidneys per se, but it's not going to be something where you have, a kidney disorder or something like that as a byproduct of eating higher protein diet, unless you have something underlying that has either gone, unnoticed or you do know it and you're just continuing to eat high amounts of protein regardless. So generally speaking, it's going to be safe again, unless you have something else underlying in regards to your kidney function.
Yeah, and I think we see that, and hopefully, if that is the case with somebody it's being addressed by a doctor. And that's obviously the first route to go for somebody who may be concerned if they do have that, or if they are in fact, follow that recommendation. Not a meathead like me, but saying here, take this creatine and take this protein and do that. You got to consider your source in that sense. Your P's, the two we talked with is prioritization, and we can also call that specificity and adherence to whether it happens to be diet, whether it happens to be training and nutrition. Yep. We're hoping that police officers and those who we train and those who we coach are going to be paying attention to their protein intake, their total caloric intake, and the sources of which they get their food, and the long, well, I won't say long, but the kind of shrugged off the fiber that's important. And fiber, what I have found personally, I kind of probably like a lot of people, probably like, dare I say, the majority of the public and the population kind of don't give it the attention that it needs at times. And it's kind of, say, okay, then when you start to introduce higher amounts of, and where you're getting toward a point where you could consider it what is optimal for your body, for your needs, some people can start to get gassy or get very gassy, get very bloated, and you get the good benefit. You may feel fuller, but then you are uncomfortable, or people in the room with you are uncomfortable. So what are some of the things we can kind of do to mitigate that, particularly from some of the vegetable sources?
So I would say the biggest thing is, obviously, it's a normal part, like, just to first and foremost, like, to preface, it's a normal part of eating a diet a little bit higher in fiber, right? So, like, being a little bit more bloated, a little bit gassier, unfortunately, is going to be a part of the process. Now, as time goes on, it will subside to a certain extent, right? But ultimately, that is just a part of, like, the GI system kind of going through its process of introducing that fiber intake, because before you didn't have that, and you might have irregular bowel issues and things like that. But my best bet, or my best advice is still consider to eat that, but then monitor where you are, right? That would probably be the best piece of advice, is to monitor if there's a certain, be relatively diligent with tracking the intake initially and find kind of that sweet spot where maybe you don't feel as gassy or bloated, or there's certain kinds of vegetables that make you a little bit more gassy and bloated and things like that. So I think it's more of that mindful and that tracking to kind of determine what the cause actually is. And then seeing, not necessarily doing an elimination diet, but doing something to kind of maybe pull back on that product to see, oh, maybe that is the case, and then kind of move forward with that. But the unfortunate reality, you're probably going to see a little bit more gassy and bloatiness. It's a part of it. But I think ultimately, as you move forward, it will kind of subside, especially if you take some of those tactics into consideration.
So a lot of it comes down to then being mindful, and once you are introducing, and if you do experience some of that discomfort, then to track and do the gentle elimination. Or funny, I use the word elimination. We're talking about fiber, but generally being mindful of what you're consuming anyway, and that being a first step for somebody who has not paid attention, who has not simply just pay attention, be mindful.
Yep.
And if you're going from zero baseline of I have no idea what to eat, it's first pay attention. And we talk behavior change, and that's why it's important for somebody who has no clue. Yeah. We've talked about a couple of very important tips, and I think we scratched the surface with it. Yeah. But the big ones are prioritization and the protein, the P's that you talked about. Yep. And making sure we're paying attention to fiber, we're paying attention to our hydration as well, and some supplements like you. So you stated there, that's what they are. They're supplements. None of them are magic bullets to make a massive change in health or body composition. We can see some with a creatine, perhaps, and a little added protein from a quality source. So when it comes to coaching, I do that as part of my my job as a police officer. It's a small part of one of the hats that I wear. Somebody who is interested in working with you for coaching, what do you offer for your coaching services? Yeah.
So as mentioned, I'm a coach for Team Biolayne. I'm, most people in the space know who Lane Norton is. Awesome individual as far as, just kind of like being a spearhead for like research and evidence-based nutrition and training tactics, right? So I'm a coach there. So you can find me. I'll give you a couple of different ways you can find me. First and foremost, I'll just give you my Instagram. I'm very active on that. So it's just Tom_Coloney. So it's just my first and last name. And then as far as inquiries, about coaching or anything like that, you can find me on the Biolayne website, so biolayne.com. And then the last one is if you have any, specific inquiries, you can shoot me an email at thomas@biolayne.com.
That's thomas@biolayne.com. Okay,
yes.
Good. Yeah, we've communicated quite a bit, so I know that you're that you're very responsive to that as well. Yeah. Okay, Tom Coloney, thanks for chatting with me.
Yeah.
I'm gonna put those links that you just offered in the description of this video on YouTube, and I'm gonna share it. So appreciate you taking the time. It's been incredibly informational. I think some of the basics, at least, that we were covered. And thank you again for your time, Tom.
Yeah, no, Chris, I really appreciate it. I do have one last little caveat here that I want to throw out there, just from a tactical standpoint, because I think this is one area, understanding that there is obviously body composition and there are performance goals, right? And I think that's the hard part sometimes with the tactical population, is finding that middle ground, right? So trying to determine the best way to perform at the highest, and then having a best body composition you possibly can, but they're not always synonymous, right? So generally speaking, I think, like you said, the biggest thing is first taking care of that body composition, and then I think the performance will kind of come after. But again, I really appreciate it. I hope we chat again soon. But yeah, either way, I'm sure I'll be talking down the road.
Absolutely. Great. Thanks again, Tom. We'll talk soon.